see now. Okay. Got it. All right. The meeting of the June 5th meeting of the Emergency Disaster Preparedness Committee is hereby called to order. Let's see, who would like to lead us in the pledge?
Brendan.
Brent.
Oh, no.
Who wants- Julian, go ahead.
best One.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That was led by Julian. Okay, we need to amend the agenda. Let's see, because the alternate delegate or alternate member, Shelley, is at a remote location, she's not going to be able to vote. So just record that. We need to amend the agenda. Do I have a motion to move to amend the agenda, bring forward item 5.1, trail items 2 at SEC? All right, that's Musawi. Do I have a second? It's Harvey. All in favor? Aye. And we need to approve the amended agenda. Do we have a motion? All right, Musawi,
Seconded.
Nickam. All in favor? Aye. Okay, unanimous. Now we're ready to go to the main event, item 5.1, our presentation. Let me just pull out my notes here.
Dr. Dewitt, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Perfect.
Great. I'm going to just take a minute, introduce our guest of honor this evening. Now, all of us on EDPC know that Laguna Beach has a true four-season climate: fire, flood, landslide, and earthquake. Now, kidding aside, those are the big four disaster hazards, as we all know, identified in our FEMA-approved local hazard mitigation plan. And all can be aggravated or mitigated by various weather events, and extreme events appear to be happening more frequently in our changing climate. This underscores the growing importance of accurate weather forecasting to our overall preparedness posture. To give us a critical heads up on what an expected ENSO shift from the current La Nina condition to a likely moderate to strong El Nino condition portends for coastal Orange County, we're extraordinarily grateful and fortunate to have with us Dr. David Dewitt, Director of the NOAA and National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center, tasked with weather prediction on timescales from weeks to seasons. Now, no one is more highly qualified, period. Dr. Dewitt has headed up the center for nearly 9 years. Prior to joining NOAA in 2012, he spent 13 years as a research scientist at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia University. And that's after earning his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in meteorology. He's also a Google Scholar and executive editor of Climate Dynamics, which is a very highly respected academic journal of climate science, and an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment Report number 5. And I've only hit a few of the high points. Dr. Dewitt, thank you again for agreeing to take your time so late in your evening back in Washington area to help our small at-risk coastal community be better prepared for whatever might be coming our way. And we'd be delighted to get started. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. So I can give you a high-level short answer to what's likely to happen with El Nino. And, the practical reality is that El Nino tends to favor above normal precipitation in the winter for California. But the thing you have to recognize is that El Nino only explains, and there are different methodologies to do this, somewhere between 10 and 25% of the winter precipitation in California. So although it does tilt the odds, it is certainly not going to necessarily be the dominant answer. And I'll show a couple of examples of that. So for instance, just in this last winter, where you had La Nina conditions, right, where you would have expected below normal precipitation for a large part of California, many of you are still probably digging out of the snow, right? That's a practical reality. So as was said, I'm Dave Dewitt. I'm the director of the Climate Prediction Center, and it's a great pleasure to speak with you today. If you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a short outline of what I'm going to cover here. First, I'm going to talk about the practical reality of skill on these timescales. Next, I'm going to discuss matching forecast skill and user risk tolerance. Every forecast product has a skill profile, and every user has a risk tolerance. Then I'm going to show one of the most difficult forecast challenges that we face, we being the global scientific community, and that's the transition. So for instance, as you transitioned last winter from this extreme drought conditions to massive heavy snow, right? And that was the same sort of scenario we saw in the 2016, 2017 La Nina. The practical reality is that state of the science right now, those sort of shifts are only forecastable at a couple of weeks lead. That is the reality. Then I'm going to talk about drought conditions in California. I'll use two different metrics about that. One will be for the last 23 years, using a product that you might have heard of called the U.S. Drought Monitor. And then I'll look at a broader region, which will be the Southwest, and we'll look at the last 100 years. And then I'll close it by talking about long-term drivers of drought. So an important point here is I'm going to spend a considerable amount of time talking about subseasonal to seasonal variability. Consider that's week 2 to 3 months, and then the seasonal would be the subseasonal week 2 to 3 months, and then a few seasons, out from that. You have to distinguish that from the lower frequency signal. So when I come to the end and I start to talk about aridification of the South, that's a different phenomenon. It has a different sort of profile. The practical reality of it is, of course, also that we don't have very many examples of 50 or 70-year predictions. So it's very hard to say what is the skill of that. You can certainly look at the record of what's occurred in the last several decades and see that we are seeing this aridification in the Western US, and it is highly consistent with climate modes that we're familiar with. Next slide. So again, in terms of this subseasonal to seasonal, we're talking day 8 out to 2 years. That's the longest time scale defined by a recent piece of legislation from the Congress. The practical reality is that generally speaking, that day 8, or what we would normally do is a week 2, day 8 to 14 average, that product is going to have a higher skill than a seasonal forecast. That's not always true, but generally speaking, that is true. It's also important to recognize that forecast skill on these time scales is highly variable. Space and time and the field. Are you looking at temperature and precipitation? Generally speaking, temperature has higher skill than precipitation. The other important point to recognize is forecasts on these timescales are probabilistic, right? We're not going to tell you that 18 days from now, you're going to get an inch of rain. You can pull that sort of data out of the model. It's not considered accurate, right? The error bars on it would be quite large. So another important point to recognize, and I'll emphasize this again in the next slide, is whether or not a particular product or forecast is useful for a stakeholder very much depends on two factors: the skill profile of that product and the risk tolerance of the stakeholder. So we deal with a variety of stakeholders here at the Climate Prediction Center, from military planners to Western water managers. And we deal quite a lot with Western water managers, have very good working relationship with California Department of Water Resources, Western States Water Council. And because of the nature of that decision-making process, Western water managers tend to be fairly conservative, understandably, right? You don't want to spill water. Any reservoir, let me go back a little bit. Any reservoir can be looked at for two purposes. One is flood control, and the other is water supply. And you don't want to spill water out of a reservoir if you anticipate that you're going to need that water at a future time, unless you're really nervous about flooding. Now, of course, you did have that situation in Orville several years ago, right, where the spillway almost broke and the dam almost flooded, the downstream community. But there's this delicate balance. On the other hand, military planners will always tell you, we'll take 5149. Doesn't mean they'll act 5149, right? That's a shift in probability. 51 positive, 49 negative, but they'll actually look at that. Water resource manager will never look at 5149. In my experience with water resource managers, again, understandably, they like 80%. And if you're going to be in an 80% likelihood, again, not 100, 80% likelihood, then you're looking at a week 2 product. That is the time horizon on which you can plan. Next slide. So this particular slide, the shape of this rainbow cone is meant to represent uncertainty or forecast skill. The shortest time horizon is on the left, and that's when we have the most accuracy. That's why the width of the cone is the narrowest, right? So less uncertainty, higher accuracy at those shorter time scales. As you go out to the seasonal time scale, more uncertainty, lower accuracy. And the practical reality is that a lot of folks do make use of week 2 forecast for agricultural decisions, for water resource decisions, for energy allocation decisions. And they would like to have that same skill level on a seasonal time scale. And I would love to be able to provide that to you. But in many cases, that's just not the practical reality. And so, you know, each user, again, needs to look at what decisions are they comfortable making and what is their risk tolerance. And it very much varies across stakeholders. We have stakeholders we work with who will use one product but not another because they're using them in different decision-making contexts. Next slide. So this figure actually shows the last time you had a La Nina transition, and it was at the back end of extended drought. This was the 2011 to 2017 California drought. What you're seeing here is the U.S. Drought Monitor, which many of you may be familiar with. That's used to pay agricultural insurance claims for one of the major USDA crop insurance programs. And the darker reds, that's the more severe drought. The lighter orange and yellow, those are less severe drought. But what you see is this, and this ellipse that I've circled there, is you go essentially from having a lot of drought in California, right? Near record drought. You had had a little bit of relief the year before, but near record drought, and then it was gone in 2 months. It was gone in 2 months, and the practical reality was that was La Nina conditions. And again, La Nina tends to favor below normal precipitation in California, but it only explains 10 to 25%, right? So there's still a huge part of the variability that's not explained. And what happened in this case, same thing that happened this past winter, is that you had something we call the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is a subseasonal mode of climate variability. The impacts from that, which led to a lot of atmospheric rivers, dominated the impacts from the La Nina. So it's not that the La Nina wasn't active, it's that another climate phenomena was dominant. The unfortunate reality with the Madden-Julian oscillation at present is that you can predict the impacts of the Madden-Julian oscillation 2 to 3 weeks. That's basically where we are. Again, it doesn't matter if you're European center model, our model, US model, everybody's in the same ballpark about here. So that's you just remember that. So this tremendous regime transition occurred over about 2-month period, totally removed your drought in California, and was only predictable at about a 2-week lead. Excuse me. Same thing again this winter. Next slide. So this particular slide shows the drought average for the state of California since 2000. You may ask why I go back to 2000. This is for the U.S. Drought Monitor. I go back to 2000 because that's when the U.S. Drought Monitor started. I should say we are partners in the production of the U.S. Drought Monitor with the National Centers for Environmental Information, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the National Drought Mitigation Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so what you see here is that California is almost always in drought. That's been a practical reality. But the other thing you see is that if you look in the last 10 years or so, you see that there's a lot more drought. And in particular, you have this ramp up starting in around 2013 into this intense drought state. And then you got some relief, right? What I was mentioning before, these atmospheric rivers, but it didn't last long. You then bumped into another multi-year drought that just ended this winter. And so, and you can go back earlier where the drought was not as intense, but you see the same basic pattern. You have 3, 4, 5 years of drought, then you get a very good year and the surface drought goes away. You say, oh, things are fine. Well, not really. You then onset to another drought period. And the other thing is that This is really just looking at the surface water. This is not looking at the groundwater that's being depleted every time you have one of these extended drought periods. Next slide. So this is a slightly different way to look at what is happening. And this is a broader area, but it applies to California independently. This is someone else's analysis that I'm borrowing, and Mankin et al. Is a study report. And so what this looks at is the pattern of precipitation in the left panel for the Southwest US over the last 100 years. The thicker line is a 100-year average. And then on the right panel is the temperature in the Southwest US. And so what you see is that the last 20-year period had the least precipitation in the 100-year record, and the temperature was the highest in the 100-year record. So the reason that the temperature aspect is important is that increased temperature tends to lead to increased evaporation. So both of those factors are leading, less precipitation, more evaporation is leading to a negative balance, precipitation minus evaporation, which is leading to aridification, right? So, you're drying out over the whole Southwest US. And people are starting to talk about this. Is this the new normal? Now, I won't speculate on that, but clearly the data so far does suggest that the last 20 years in the Southwest have been the driest, least precipitation, and the warmest, which probably doesn't surprise you, but that also, again, leads to this compounding effect of enhanced evaporation. So further leading to aridification. Next slide. And this particular slide is complicated. I won't go into a lot of details on it. This is a study by a colleague of mine here at the Climate Prediction Center, Dr. Hailan Wang, who's one of the world's leading experts on drought. And so that upper left panel shows what the difference was for the 2000 to 2018 period minus 1900 to 1999. So essentially, what's the trend over the last about 20 years compared to the previous century? And you see that over the Western US, California especially, below normal precipitation, okay? And obviously you folks have experienced that, right? Also in the Colorado Basin, which impacts you folks tremendously, right? Because of Lake Powell and Lake Mead and the headwaters of the upper Colorado. So then this lower right panel shows three different oscillations, three different climate patterns that are of relevance to drought. And these are associated with sea surface temperatures. So sea surface temperatures have a lot to do with the large scale atmospheric flow. And the information contained in this bottom right figure is that we have a global warming trend, which again, doesn't probably surprise you. We have what we would call a cold Pacific decadal oscillation. That's the middle panel. And then we have a warm Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. So the bad news there is that each of those three patterns independently favors that upper left panel of precipitation, right? They favor drought in the Western US. And so if you look at this from a perspective, and this is where I had said before, this is distinct from what I was talking about subseasonal to seasonal, where we have lots of cases can look at forecast scale. This essentially is looking at where we are observationally. We can run models to try to reproduce this, and they do a very good job of reproducing this trend with respect to what's happening in the Western US. So the bottom line right now is that with the warm Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, the cold Pacific decadal oscillation, and the global warming trend, all of those speak to the fact that you're likely to continue to see aridification in the Western US. And I don't see any mechanism that's going to change the global warming trend. So that one's going to be baked in. The Pacific decadal oscillation, could it flip? Sure. We have no ability to predict that. Excuse me. And the same with the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. But certainly the condition you have right now, and I should say, as you can probably tell by looking at them, they don't vary quickly, right? When they change, right? So it is a quick transition, but there's no indication right now that any of these three is changing. So you may see a very similar pattern over the next decade, more similar to what we've seen in the last 25 years, where you're going to have 3, 4, 5 years of drought in California. Sometimes those periods are going to be very severe. Sometimes they could be more moderate. Then you'll get a year of heavy rain and snow, maybe a second year, but then you're going to go right back into the cycle of below normal precipitation. Next slide. So again, a few summarizing thoughts. Forecast scale for California on this subseasonal to seasonal time scale generally depends on what time scale you're in. That week 2 product is going to be more accurate than the monthly or the seasonal. The current prediction tools have struggled to predict these regime transitions, especially from drought to near normal. We saw that this past winter. We saw that in 2016, 2017. California's been in an extended drought for the last 23 years. Briefly interrupted by wet years. But then again, you're right back into 3, 4, 5 years of drought, 1 year of relief, 3, 4, 5 years of drought. The last 20 years have been the driest and warmest on record for the last 100 years. And then finally, the large scale sea surface temperature modes, which drive large scale climate circulations, are consistent with the continued aridification of the Western US. So that's what I have. I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Chief Bill or Doc Bill?
Unmute
Thank you for the presentation. Very comprehensive. From our perspective, and we're a disaster preparedness committee, and we find it difficult to isolate the forecast for red flag warnings, which is our heightened fire season. When the Santa Ana winds blow here, that's the apex of our fire season. But the prediction is possibly maybe 2 weeks out. Is there any means of identifying those periods earlier than 2 weeks?
Do you mean at a longer lead than that?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say not with accuracy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Shelley, do you have any questions? Shelley, I'm sorry, do you have any questions?
I would just like to say thank you. This is very informative and I have a whole page of notes. So no questions right now, but maybe later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? And
I've got one additional question, Bill Nickham. The forecast for Southern California fire season is likely a bit below normal. Does your intelligence indicate that? Is that something that we should be looking towards, and or is it unknown?
No, I mean, it's a fair question. So we don't issue fire forecasts. There's a National Integrated Fire Center in Boise, NIFC.
Yes.
I'd look at their forecast, but I mean, I think the factors you're looking at are that, again, you're coming off 5 years of severe drought, a massive amount of precipitation, either as rain or snow, it's probably led to undergrowth of vegetation that's sitting below a very dry tree canopy, and probably a lot of that precipitation is a little, has penetrated a little bit into the soil, but not necessarily very deep. So my belief, and I hike and camp a lot, is that that's the sort of condition where you could easily get fires. Certainly, you're going to have basically a wetter background, but that new vegetation, I'm Boy Scout, that's tinder. That's going to help fuel fires, perhaps.
Okay. Yep. That's pretty consistent with what we've been reading.
If I can, I just want to make one comment. Dr. Dewitt, thanks so much. From our side, one of the things that Dr. Dewitt mentioned, that probabilistic consideration, and that's one of our biggest challenges is what's that threshold? And I know, Dr. Dewitt, you gave a good example of, do you use the 5149, or is your stakeholder, are we as an agency saying, it's got to be an 80% probability that we're going to get the 3 inches of rain to make those scale up decisions and some of those mitigation decisions in advance. And what is that threshold? And I think that's what we're looking at as a city. And I think the heat event that we had this past fall, it was a good example of that, where we as a group sort of didn't have a clear threshold for that, as to the probability of it being 95 degrees with a heat index of 102. And what probability do we need to then trigger our plan? Do we need it to be an 80% probability of a heat index of 102? Some of us would say, no, like if we have a 60% chance of it getting there, then we should be doing X, Y, and Z. And so that's why some of our plans were looking at those probabilities to say, let's create those in our threshold. Not if it's forecasted to get 3 inches of rain. Let's say if the probability is 60% that we're going to have 3+ inches, then we should start doing X, Y, Z. Same thing on the heat events and those other things. So he mentioned it. That's one of the hard things that we look at, is what is that threshold? Because I think we would look at a much lower threshold to say, if it's a 51% chance, then let's start scaling up. Let's add the staff. Let's do the things.
So Brendan, I'm sorry, Brendan, what is the threshold? Is it 51%?
So we don't have it in our new plans. We're going away. We're not going away from some of those 3 inches of rain or 100 degrees, but we're adding in that our updated plans are going to have a probability. It's just agreeing on what that probability is that we're looking at as a team to say, from a city side, what's that threshold from a probability standpoint? And so it's looking at the probabilities versus the forecast in general is I think a better way of looking at it. And I think it's the direction that we're going in. It's what our threshold is going to be. And I think that's just what we look at as a team. So.
Well, hopefully that'll get resolved sooner rather than later. And it depends on the event. I mean, if it's a matter of setting up some beds in the shelter, maybe 51 to 60% isn't such a bad threshold. Whereas if you have to turn the whole city upside down.
I don't mind turning 51%. I'll turn the whole city upside down, Matt.
Okay,
You know
I'm
that.
with you
But
on that.
no, and I think that's what we look at. So.
Well, great. Any other questions from anyone?
I actually do have a question. Dr. Dewitt, this is Bill Dodge. I'm a physician by training, so a little bit slow on what you said. You had said something about sea surface temperature variations are all typically associated with drought in the Western U.S. Could you explain a little bit about sea surface temperature variations and how they affect the drought in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 3 patterns that I showed have been shown through use of Earth system models. So Earth system model is a model that's based on hydrodynamic equations, and then to cover the fluid flow, and then you add in physics, things like representing clouds and evaporation from the surface. And when you take these models, which are the same sort of models they would use for weather prediction, although they'll have some modifications, and then also for the climate change sort of scenarios. If you take those and you force them with those different sea surface temperature patterns that I was showing there, and you look at the evolution of precipitation over the US, what you find is that each of those patterns individually leads to a basic pattern of a drier west and a wetter east. And then you add them together, and again, you get some cancellation, some places it gets worse. And that picture I showed in that upper left-hand corner, that's with all 3 of those patterns active. But the important point is that those patterns have been in place. Again, in the global warming one, look, you can look at that, not trying to sell you on global warming if you don't believe, but you can look at that figure and see that for the last multiple decades, the temperature has been above normal relative to the last century, okay? And there's no reason to believe that that's going down, right? And then the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, again, that varies on timescales of 30, 40 years. We have no idea when it might transition, right? And the same with the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation. Some of these oscillations influence other major patterns of weather/climate variability. So that Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, that is a major factor in how severe the hurricane season is, the Atlantic hurricane season. So that particular pattern actually leads to above normal hurricane activity. And so when people talk about the last several decades they've had above normal hurricane activity, that is a key factor. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see the cold that goes for the Pacific Oscillation, and then the warm is the Atlantic
Yeah.
Oscillation. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sounds like there's a whole lot of oscillating going on. Julian, Dr. Musali, anything? Any questions from you guys? Bill, any last questions from you? I've got a couple, but I want to make sure everybody else.
Yeah,
Sure.
go for it.
All right, well, I was just, Dr. Dewitt, again, thank you for doing this, and we appreciate it. I was looking at an article that I saw a couple of weeks ago from the Yale Environment 360 publication. You're probably familiar with it. Postulated some significant cooling in the upper atmosphere, and indicating that that might have a pronounced influence on our weather patterns that frankly we're just not terribly familiar with. That this may be something that we really have to do a little bit more research on. Does the present NOAA or NWS weather model take this into account, or is this still kind of an evolving model evolution,
Yeah.
if you will, in process?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. And so when you talk about global warming, what global warming is to first order is the carbon dioxide certainly traps some of this infrared radiation. Thermal radiation is infrared radiation. Like, so during the Gulf War, people had the night vision goggles and you could see a temperature, right? That's infrared radiation. And so the Earth and the atmosphere radiate because they have a temperature, right? Anything above absolute zero Kelvin will radiate thermal radiation. And so what happens under global warming, as you add that extra CO2, and that impact gets greatly amplified by water vapor. What happens is that you're trapping that radiation towards the surface, which means that it's no longer warming the upper atmosphere, right? So it's kind of a conservation of energy. So if it's being trapped near the surface of the Earth, or some level in the atmosphere, and not going up higher, it's not warming that upper layer in the atmosphere. And so that's what they're talking about there. Now, the models do capture this. One of the challenges you have with all of these models is the vertical resolution is not as high as we would perhaps like it to be. And so we do a very good job at resolving what we call the troposphere. We do, depending upon which model, a marginally good job of resolving the stratosphere. But the stratosphere actually is an extremely important part of the atmosphere. Even though there's not a lot of mass up there, there's a large amount of wind, right? Very strong winds. And what ends up happening, because of conservation of momentum, things that happen in the stratosphere have impact on the surface. So you may hear, everyone's probably heard now of El Nino. Now you've heard about atmospheric rivers. You might hear a term called sudden stratospheric warming. And that term actually relates to what happens when the circulation in the stratosphere changes. And I was just we have a set of interns here at the center today, and talking about the fact when I was in school, if you had talked about the stratosphere impacting the near surface of the Earth, people would have not considered you to be among the sharper kids in the class, right? But what we now know is that actually it's very important that the stratosphere, again, because of the fact that the winds are so fast, when the stratosphere gets this sudden stratospheric warming and the stratospheric winds shift, those impacts can, over a period of several weeks, penetrate to the surface of the Earth and last many, many weeks. And so, in fact, one of the things you're seeing happening now, I mentioned before that this past winter, the Madden-Julian oscillation overwhelmed the El Nino. Sudden stratospheric warmings, the impact of those can overwhelm the El Nino, or overwhelm the impacts of the Madden-Julian oscillation. Again, the challenge with the sudden stratospheric warmings, you can only predict them at about a 2-week lead. It's an really incredibly difficult problem. It involves waves propagating up from the surface. They get to the tropopause, which is I'm sorry if I'm being technical here, the boundary between the troposphere and the stratosphere, and they cause wave breaking. And then, depending upon certain circumstances, the impact can come back down. So that's, something that everyone recognizes we need to do a better job of, and people are actively working on that. But that's sort of what they're referring to, that, if you're changing the circulation up in the stratosphere, that will impact the jet stream. Whether or not we can predict that beyond a couple of weeks is a different issue.
Got another question. Oh, back in November, on November 7th, I think, we had a presentation from Dr. Daniel Swain. I'm sure you're familiar with his work regarding mega floods and atmospheric rivers. And his basic theory, as I understood it, and again, I'm not a meteorologist, is that a hotter atmosphere that leads to more evaporation can also hold more water and can lead to more dramatic rain events, like more severe atmospheric rivers, and even the greater enhanced risk of mega floods. In other words, we might see over a period of time the same mean precipitation, but it might happen in bursts rather than over a longer period of time. And obviously that can be very destructive. Now, in the LA Times on May 19th, he was quoted as saying that given the 55% probability of a strong El Nino and an 80% probability of a moderately strong El Nino, and I think that was out of your May 11th El Nino dialogue that was published on the website. He said that this looks like a really big El Nino event. This looks like a high potential for being the real deal, and it's going to have a large global effect. Do you see anything in the data that you track that would give us a higher than normal likelihood, a significantly higher than normal likelihood of a second much wetter than normal winter? And I ask that because we are subject to flood incidents here. We've had a pretty impressive history of landslides, which can be as you know, triggered by excessive moisture, excessive rain events. And we're just trying to get our arms around this, what we need to be prepared for over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and certainly, many El Nino events in the past have had significant rain in California. Now, the other practical reality is they don't all, right? That again comes down into this probability space. In terms of the strength of the El Nino, we're just getting into the beginning of summer. We've not actually gotten into what we would declare, we're an El Nino watch, right? We think it's coming. We strongly believe it's coming. In terms of how strong it's going to be, I would certainly be looking at the end of the summer. Let's see how it evolves. Again, El Nino develops. It's a coupled atmosphere-ocean phenomenon, and changes in either the atmosphere or the ocean can lead it to intensify, or could lead it to become a weaker event. I will say that what we're seeing right now, this particular structure of the event, this is what I would call, having been doing this for about 30 years, this would be a typical El Nino event, meaning that it's got a center in the Eastern Pacific, right? There's another kind of El Nino called an El Nino Modoki, which is in the Central Pacific. This type of an event, generally speaking, tends to have stronger impacts over the US. So for instance, above normal precipitation. And the reason for that is because of the sea surface temperature anomalies there in the east are going to tend to drag the jet stream to the east. And that's what really is affecting your weather in California. Is the jet stream shifted south and dragged to the east, right? So my personal, and again, we update this every month. The El Nino prediction comes out every second Thursday. The seasonal outlook comes out every third Thursday. I would be looking at it right now. And again, so the way that when I showed that diagram with the funnel, I'd be looking at that as, okay, so now we have a belief that there's a high chance we're going to have an El Nino event. Let's see where we are in third week of June, third week of July. How is that tracking? Look at the seasonal outlook. What is that looking like? But also recognizing that, and again, it's going to depend, you were just talking before about what your risk threshold is, right? If it's a 50% chance that you're going to have significantly above normal precipitation in your part of California, which you're basically the only way you're going to get that is by a lot of these atmospheric type of river events, right? Or that sort of a storm. Is that enough for you to act? And I think that's what I would be looking at. But always recognizing that your best forecast is going to be, again, of course, the best forecast is the one for tomorrow, right? But on timescales we do, the forecast out 2 weeks, right? You can look at those with a high degree of confidence. If we say there's a 70% chance that you're going to have significantly above normal precipitation in your part of California, I would take that to the bank, right? That's where you're getting to a place where I think a lot of people make a lot of decisions. It would be the information that I would say a lot of stakeholders find actionable, right? If I tell you it's going to be a 45% chance of above normal precipitation next winter, is that something you can actually act on? Maybe there are some preparatory things you can do, building in resilience into your system. But in terms of, doing more, what's the best way to say it? More aggressive actions, I think, to be honest with you, for a large part of California, 2 weeks to maybe a month is probably where you are.
Great.
Does that make sense?
No, that's very good. When we, actually 4 of us, 2 of our colleagues who are currently in Europe and Dr. Musali and I who were here, a month ago, we attended a presentation hosted by OC Parks, the seasonal, what they call their Fire Watch program, which they do every early May. And part of that, the main part of that was a presentation from your colleague, Alex Tardy. And he suggested that in fact, the predictive validity of these models is really, they need to be updated. They need to be tweaked for climate change. And that we're likely to see less and less in other words, less and less time scale, if you will, for adequate warning of things like major atmospheric rivers or Santa Ana conditions or other kind of major weather events that will basically have to be take action on. Is this something that you see that, in other words, are you seeing a greater variability of outcomes and a reduction in the predictive validity of the models, just so we have less time to prepare for various kinds of extreme weather events, or is that not really something we have to be worrying about right now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that, Alex and I are saying very similar things. And that again comes down to the week 2. And what's happened, if you look at the weather forecast, sometimes they'll talk about comparisons of the US model and the Euro, they call it European Center model. Those models have gotten better and better with time. And right now, that 2-week time window is a place where we are able to, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, provide sufficiently high accuracy, sufficiently high confidence that you can use that information. The monthly and seasonal predictions haven't gotten less accurate. We've just seen more cases. And so and I do a lot of media interview these days, and perhaps I've mentioned, we do a lot of work with Cal Water, with your state climatologist, Mike Anderson, who's a great guy, who's up there in Sacramento. What happened was that in 1997 and 1997-98 was the record strength El Nino. And it was what we would call in our field canonical or typical. And so, heavy rainfall in California, no rainfall in Washington State, the temperature patterns, it was just a spectacular forecast. And it came at a time when those sorts of models, those Earth system models, had just been made. And then conversely, 1998, 1999, which was a La Nina, not record strength, but certainly very strong, you saw, again, this very typical canonical La Nina response, below normal precipitation in California. And in fact, my predecessor, who is since deceased, those 2 events, he declared that the seasonal precipitation prediction problem is over. We can do this. This is straightforward. This is easy. And the unfortunate reality is what we have seen in the 25 years or so since then is that indeed, in fact, most El Nino and La Nina events are not canonical. And again, coming back to this 2015-16 El Nino, which you probably all lived through, which tied the 1997-98 event, its impacts were very, very different than what you saw in 97-98. And in fact, it did not ameliorate the drought in a large part of California because it was not a typical El Nino. And that's why, again, we come back to this fact that depending upon how you do the analysis, El Nino La Nina explains 10 to at most 25% of the winter precipitation variability for the state of California. That means that it explains at least not 75%, maybe higher than that. So
So then, in other words, and what you're talking about is statistical explanatory power, correct?
yes.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting that you say that. The 97, 98 event was quite remarkable here in Laguna Beach. I was not living here at the time, but there was quite a bit of flooding. And in fact, one of our former members of our committee, one of the initial members, almost lost her life. She was literally washed away when her home was destroyed, and her house guests actually drowned during the flood event during 97, 98. I don't know exactly the timing. So that's one that's kind of etched in our memory here. That was probably the worst flooding event that and a series of landslide events that we've ever had in the city. So that's something we kind of keep in mind. And then we had another biggie back in December of 2010 that actually led to the creation of this committee. So fortunately, we've done quite a bit of work on that. And we heard from our Public Works Department back in May at our last meeting what they've done to mitigate some of that risk. And we made a lot of progress there. So sounds like we did it we were in good stead doing that. Do we have any last questions for Dr. Dewitt? Sure, go
I
ahead,
have
Julian.
one. Thank you, Doctor. My question is brief. Touching on the Pacific hurricane season and the impacts of the projected modeling El Nino showing for this season or maybe in the coming 5 years. Do you see any trends as far as Pacific hurricanes becoming more impactful on the Pacific coast?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so, generally speaking, an El Nino is going to lead to enhanced tropical cyclone or hurricane activity there in the East Pacific. La Nina would be the opposite. It would be, reduced intensity and number of storms. So this year, again, you're looking at, I don't remember what our official outlook is, but you're looking at a general condition of above normal season for tropical cyclones there in the Eastern Pacific. Of course, that's a practical reality. You know better than I. Most of those don't strike California, right? They go west. Doesn't mean they're not impacting your beaches and things like that, but it only takes one, right?
Well, back in 1938, we rather famously lost a pier here in Laguna Beach to a Pacific hurricane. So I guess they can hit us, but they're kind of rare events, and hopefully they'll stay that way.
Yeah.
My wife's from Florida, so she's seen enough hurricanes to last her a while, so that hopefully we won't be seeing them here. Shelley, do you have any questions? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Dewitt.
Chief Hill, anybody? Well, seeing no one, Brendan, are you all squared away? Great. Well, Dr. Dewitt, thank you again for doing this. I know it's an imposition given the time difference and all, and we really, really appreciate your doing what you can to help us out as a little city on the Pacific out here. And obviously, we're an at-risk community, and we really do appreciate the service that you render not only to our community, but to our country. So our thanks to you and your colleagues at NOAA and the National Weather Service. You guys do a great job, and we really, truly appreciate it. So thank you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure. And feel free to, send questions if you have them. Happy to have another dialogue if it's beneficial.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Wow. I hope not too much of my hair is standing on end. All right, moving on. All right, talk about getting it from the horse's mouth. He's basically the most senior weather forecaster in the federal government for the short to medium term forecast. So that's good to get it straight from the authority.
If the Pacific is gonna see more hurricanes, that means the water will be warmer,
Right,
which means
Right.
we'll have more tourists
right.
here this summer. and That'll probably continue. I'm just kind of thinking about that, you know.
Bill, he doesn't do the tourist forecast.
With that?
He doesn't do the tourist
No,
forecast.
that's why I didn't ask the question. I just find it interesting.
All right, well, let's get back to our normal program then. Let's see, our next item up is the approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
All right, motion from Dr. Dodge,
Then second,
second by Bill Nickum. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. And thank you, Edward, for doing this. It's a tedious task, but it's a very necessary one and an important one. Okay, public communication. If we have anything from the members of our fire department present, seeing as you're the only members of the public.
We'll be hiring new firefighters by hopefully have them on board by the end of August.
Are they replacements or are they,
They are just for people who have or
right? Great.
on our year of having an ambulance program in place. That has been an outstanding success during the process of bringing on. Brendan told me it was seven new ambulance attendants. They are ambulance operators. They're going to be part-time. So we keep a large part-time group because as the program was designed, our full-time ambulance operators are usually on that precipice of being hired full-time as a full-time firefighter. And then all of them have gone in the firefighter job. So as they get hired and leave the city, we pull from our part-time folks and bring them in. So we always have a ready force that's been trained and can work, and also keep our costs down. One time takes time off.
Right. What has been the turnover experience? I think that, when we went into this back a year or so ago, I think there was some concern. I know Bill had some issues and concerns around the rate of turnover. I think the one study that I saw was done by one of the AMBO companies was that it was basically about 50% a year, which is pretty much equivalent to what you get at McDonald's.
We haven't seen that high. I wouldn't mind seeing it that high. If it was for the right reason.
yeah,
What we're seeing is, what we've seen probably predominantly in our group is two things. One is they're getting hired as a full-time firefighters, or they are going from full-time back to part-time to attend either an academy or paramedic school.
that makes sense.
That we're going to be hiring. I know we have several of our ambulance folks in that pool. I would be thrilled if we were able to hire a few of those.
Mhm.
But we are not having the difficulties that the industry's having. So we're not immune to it. I just saw word that Palm Beach Fire Department has cross-trained their several of their lifeguards because they are being pinched from not having.
That's a good one.
It's across the country. I just came back from the conference in Palm Springs, and I would say 50% of presentations and the symposiums held were centered around patients. it's a challenge, but it's been a challenge.
I don't think too many people want to be career ambo operators.
No, and that's our goal. Our goal. Because that's not a career job.
No.
It is, really, it's a great introduction into whether it's pre-hospital care or law enforcement or something else. It's a great introduction in that, but it's not a job that you can support family. It's just not. So we don't want it to become that.
Great. Is it, could this feed into like a reserve program if we wanted to set up a reserve program? I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't know if that makes sense for us or not.
Yeah, it was, you guys can hear him okay? We've had a reserve program in the past, as you know now.
Yes.
The reserve program for our department really was born out of volunteer firefighter.
Right.
So we had volunteer firefighters for many years in Laguna Beach that were augmenting the full-time personnel. What changed was a lot of the firefighting tactics and a lot of the regulations behind training people to be on air and going into IDLH or immediately dangerous to life and health environments. And so that really changed the dynamic of having volunteers. You didn't have enough time to train them to be in those situations, and so they became something less than a firefighter. They were kind of relegated to stand outside, and it just became probably a little bit more cumbersome than we wanted. So we do have the ambulance personnel now. They are on the track to be firefighters in their own careers, and we can use our part-timers to augment some things if we need to. But at this point, I just don't see us wading back into that reserve firefighter pool like that. And I say that because it is felt with bandwidth of, training, not only we've had a lot of federal in the department, so training on full-time firefighters and the accompanying ranks above them, but also the ambulance. We try to fill out bandwidth for what we can train, what we can recruit, and what we can staff. And so once that levels out, I think there might be, an opportunity there, but at this point, probably not.
Well, hopefully when we get the community risk assessment and standards of cover study done, I don't think the current budget document tracks this. It did as of 2 years ago. I rather noticed the fact that we had not increased the number of sworn firefighters in the department for, literally since the end of the last millennium, at a time when the city staff has increased, non-FD staff has increased by a factor of almost 50%. So hopefully we'll pay attention to that going forward.
I'm not
So we're with you. Go ahead, Edward.
Is the revenue predictions materializing for the AMBO program?
Not sure. Great question. One of the last meetings we had, one of the issues is just the billing cycle itself. So we started our program from nothing. And so we were several months into it before we even became a contractor for Medicare, Medicaid, the VA. I think we just recently got that as a VA contract. And so that was a big delay. But our billing company, we outsource all of that billing to a company that does EMS billing or ambulance billing for most of Orange County. What they've told us is that we can't really close our books until December. So you'll see in December when we finally, all the insurance, all of the different payments that we receive come due. The other issue that's going to be involved in there too is that discussion of what if we don't do that? And the reality is, we have other options. So city. But I also know that our last RFP that we did for ambulance, the minimum we were gonna have to chip in is $750,000 a year. That was our loss, and that was with a private company that's currently locally underperforming in the current contract. And we only got one today, you know. I think what we have is a fantastic program. I think that those that are doing it are well protected from that point of view, and I think that
We'll start equipping the AMBO operators with little stripe units or whatever, so they can ask for credit cards when they pick up a patient.
No, it's just that,
it's our stuff, but it's across the board, not just here in California, but by the federal government reimbursement as well. The insurance companies are extremely tight in their reimbursements. They
Right.
pop back on patients. So everyone's being impacted, and I'm just hoping that there's a fix out there for us that can help stabilize that whole industry and that whole hospital service. But I'm sure Dr. Dodge would tell you it did extend into the hospitals.
right, because the private or the commercial portions of it, we had a significant increase in pricing. So I'm just kind of wondering if that had any kind of an impact for users who don't have the insurance, or if the commercial carriers are willing to pay the type of premiums, because I think we had a twofold, threefold increase at the time, roughly.
Yeah.
And, I know it kind of met what Irvine and some of the other people were doing, but still it was a big jump
Yeah, it was
for,
a big chunk, and I think that we're probably safe to say that we're close to the top still.
Mhm.
Others are catching up. Are the private insurers coming clean? They're not. But at the same time, we have been running a policy that has been pretty generous towards our residents to not put them in a bad spot.
Well, don't get Doctors Musawi or Dodge going on the insurance companies. We'll be here all night.
Well, I do want to comment that I was actually reflecting about how before the California legislature, there is a current bill to increase Medi-Cal rates, which are ridiculously low. And there's a push for emergency physicians to ask for more money. And I'm sure EMS also has to be looking to ask the governor and the assembly for more money from Medi-Cal, because it certainly doesn't really pay for anything. And then you throw on top of the fact that the private healthcare companies now just don't pay at all. So this is going to put a squeeze on hospitals, physicians, EMS systems. So I guess the one question are the EMS directors looking at legislation in Sacramento right now to see if they can carve out a bigger piece of the pie of Medi-Cal for ambulance services?
100%. Those that aren't aware, Medi-Cal is the California version of Medicaid. And Medicaid patients that's a federal entitlement program. So the federal government says that if you're in Medicaid, use Medicaid for federal, that they cover the cost of all of your care. And the state has taken the position that they're not going to cover any of the costs of a Medicaid patient. We administer it as a state.
Right.
It's called Medicaid, Medi-Cal. We added our own cool name to it. But the reality is that's a federal entitlement program, and the state reimburses us through Medi-Cal. So the ambulance program has ambulance providers, and specifically the municipal ambulance providers, such as Dewitt Beach, have started a new program. It started in January, and it's called PPGMT, and that is the Ground Emergency Medical Transportation Program. And what we do is we take the Medi-Cal payment, and the Medi-Cal payment is somewhere close to $200 for an ambulance. We then submit back and based on our actual cost of providing, we take the cost, everyone puts in what their cost of provision of that ambulance ride is across the state. We develop a number. The number right now is 1,060. So for every Medicare patient we transport, we're going to cover above their $200 line, 5,000. We are looking for next year in 2024 to increase that number. If you look across the US, there's other states where it's up in $2,000, $3,000.
Oh, yeah. I've,
Very poor coordinating our efforts to ensure that we're getting reimbursed at a proper rate. Now, it's complicated, but part of it is that we have, as participants, we need to put in some money to cover what we call the state's cost of it, because the state has said they're not gonna lose any money in any Medicaid, Medi-Cal program. So we send them, I think our all-in is close to 7,000, and we'll get back. Everyone's going to volunteer in, we get the money back. For us, we have a very small number of Medicaid Medi-Cal patients. Overall, it's a very small number out of 1,500 transfers. We're hovering around 200.
Wow.
Medicare is a much greater number, and there is no additional funding from Medicare. By contrast, a city like Santa Ana, it's a multi-million-dollar building. They get millions of dollars back through that Medicare.
Mhm.
So there is extra money coming in. We anticipate more money coming in over the next few years because we're going to revise the way we account for our actual costs. Hopefully raise that $1,000 up into the $2,000. But at the same time, for Laguna Beach, just our payer mix isn't heavy in that area. The Dr. Dodge, the more people you sign up at the hospital, we might be uninsured at the home.
have we considered a program that I believe other cities have where people, residents basically pay a nominal fee, whatever it is?
Subscription, Newport Beach.
Subscription. Yeah, exactly.
So subscription fee that's the one that started. How some using parts of this starting the ambulance program is such a big lift in a city that never had one before, that if you started adding all these other things, it's going to be
Impossible.
very distracting. And so what the subscription service is they charge somewhere in the $50 to $60 a year. It's usually voluntary. They can add it to their utility bills depending on what that governance of that city is. And what they trade you off is they say, look, we will take whatever your insurance pays for ambulance, and we won't come out and do anything. So that $50 buys off any unfunded parts of the ambulance. The positive part of it is it brings us some money up front every year to help reimburse for the program. But it is voluntary. We can actually sit down and figure out how to separate that. And store it, we have people not for that program. It might be something that we want to look at.
Right.
Well, one last question. Is there any thought to hotel fee per se? Because we do see, as you know, a lot of patients that come in from hotels, surf and sand, perhaps maybe adding on, I mean, how many visitors do we have a year? 2 million, adding on like a penny to all those visitors would probably bring in some amount of money for the ambulance service.
Well, the business number of visitors a year is somewhere around 6.5 million. Only I think about 5% of them though are actually staying in hotels.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know that we, you know, we tapped into the transfer occupancy tax for the hotels for other items such as, don't we have a business improvement district tax on there right now for, and I think we're up to about 15%. We're in that range somewhere where we have increased our TOT tax. What I've seen in the past, just from watching those get adjusted, is it generally has to come from the industry, because they know when, at what point do they start to drive the customer away. So 15% of your room rate, I think they're acceptable. As you start to increase that transfer occupancy tax.
Well, we're well below 15%. I think Anaheim has 15%. I think we're around 10 or maybe 11. Yeah. I think we're below that. I don't know, Julian, do you? Yeah, 12. That sounds about right. Where's John Thomas now that we need him, right? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Council liaison update. Well, Bob's not here, unfortunately, so we'll skip that. Staff update. Brendan, you're up.
Thanks. Chief Hill talked about on the fire department side, some of our recruitment. One key piece is we had a farewell for Chief Weiner on Friday
Oh, really?
and wished him bon
retiring?
voyage. He has retired.
I would have liked to have known about that.
Me too.
Yeah, I think he didn't want it to be a public thing. So it was an internal fire PD public safety staff for his final walkout on Friday. It was a really nice ceremony that we had. And we're going to wish him luck.
Has that position been, I mean?
So that's the chief is going through the BC internal recruitment promotion for our new battalion chief, and doing his interviews, and we'll present and interview with Sheree. I think the hope is have the position filled in within the next month.
Great.
Excellent.
Have the person selected.
That's moving fast.
Yeah, it's helpful. We've had a BC promotion list, so we already have the list.
Yeah.
And being able to draw from that list and do the interviews and find the best candidate to fill. It's a big shoes to fill. Fill Oppie's shoes.
Oh, Oppie's been here forever, I think.
Yeah. Just a quick update on the fire department moving down to the community and recreation center. Public Works is still working with the fire department to figure out the spacing. Trying to fit 10 staff members into those admin offices and trying to figure out what that arrangement's going to look like. So there's still sufficient space for the staff and for staff that supervise, their ability to be able to work with people. It's a tight fit in the admin offices for the 10 staff members. So Public Works is working on that with Chief King. And that's, that is the extent of what we know at this point. So it's still being discussed as to when that move can happen. Just for everybody's awareness, as we get to our 1 year mark, the outdoor warning system that council put some money into for us to expand. The Bluebird Canyon site, we got our design review approved last week. So there's a 2-week comment period for Bluebird Canyon, and that's going to be 2 locations up on Morningside Drive in Bluebird Canyon. We are attaching them to the new city-owned streetlights up there, which is a different approach to it. I think I talked about it probably 6 months ago now. The design, the design review process is very challenging in the city. even for the fire department to install emergency outdoor speakers. It
Well, I
is
think
a,
they may have some help there. They have a new member I hear who knows a little bit about this stuff.
it is a challenging process to get that. So we're finally, assuming there's no public comment, we'll be able to pull the permits on that. And we're scheduled to install the week of June 19th, which will be great. So Bluebird Canyon will be up and running. The other site, so we have funding for 2 different sites, is going to be up in Canyon Acres. It's a significant gap that we had with the previous system, and a pretty significant fire risk up there.
Oh, yeah.
The city owns 2 lots about halfway up Canyon Acres Drive on the south side of Canyon Acres that we bought after the flooding and landslides. And the city bought them to never be developed. So it's city property. I'm hoping the permitting process will be, well, it's painful. But we're going to put the pole up there, and it's going to be entirely run off of solar. That was the challenge when Jordan originally rolled it out and finding a location in Canyon Acres. There's no power up there,
Right.
but now the system's been improved enough that we're going to run it entirely off of solar, and not have any issues. So that's going to be a great addition. And then the last piece to the outdoor warning system is improving the lifeguard, the main beach. And what we're doing is we're upgrading their system so that the marine safety dispatch can basically use the outdoor warning speaker at the main beach tower, the white tower, as a PA system if they need to. So they don't have to run out to the tower and get on it if they need to quickly. They don't have to necessarily remote in. They're going to have basically a PA system as well as the emergency alerting. So that's going to be a great upgrade to that.
Brendan, I have a question. What about Diamond Crestview, which is like Canyon Acres and Bluebird was identified as one of the top 3 circulation black holes, and obviously is a very at-risk tip of the spear fire area. I think the city's in the process of finally getting around to mitigating Diamond Canyon. Where does that stand?
So we looked at it. We could only do 2 new sites this year, and it's limited. And so Canyon Acres, with our ability to put it on our site, the challenge with Diamond Crestview is we looked at it. We drove around with the consultants. We worked with the water district with the tower across. There's still not a sufficient enough location to be able to reach that neighborhood. The tower, the water tank across. It's when we're looking at how many homes each system can reach, we're trying to maximize that.
Sure.
And so halfway up Canyon Acres, it's going to be facing both east and west on Canyon Acres, and it's going to hit that whole community for now. So that, when we think about the 3 limited access, what did we call it? Limited access? Access impaired.
Most access impaired.
Access
which is a
impaired.
high
There were
standard
3
in this town.
neighborhoods that were identified: Bluebird Canyon, Canyon
Crestview,
Acres,
and
and
Canyon-
Diamond
right.
Crestview. So we're gonna, we did not ask city council for more money in this year's budget for expanding the outdoor warning system again. We got the money last year. We're gonna have to carry some of it over to continue the project. But council has continued to be supportive of that project, and expanding it as we go on. I don't think we would have gotten additional money this year. And there's also still grants out there. So we'll keep looking at ways that we can continue to expand that, because it has been nothing but successful, that project. And all we hear from residents is we want more. And when do we get that is basically a unanimous decision to try to expand that.
Well, I pay attention to that. I mean, I would happen to live in Diamond Crestview. It's no more important than any other neighborhood, because when we sit up here, all 40 of them are our neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. And when we looked at it with the consultants and the chief, and when we looked at what's our best bang for the buck for this year, it was getting that Canyon Acres.
Don't have to worry about
location.
us. When we get that next little alert, Mary and I have drilled it. I mean, 90 seconds, we're in the car
That I believe.
heading down the road.
That I
I was
believe.
gonna say, Matt, if we don't lose someone who lived up there, that we could put those speakers on their house.
Right on our roof.
Yeah.
If you want to put a fire station in the vacant lot next door, that's okay too.
We have a small fire engine.
Yeah. So then we're obviously working with the whole city is planning for 4th of July again. So planning efforts are underway with that. The event action plan is being put together. I think it's going to be very carbon copy of how we did things last year from a public safety operational standpoint. Lots of work with that to get the EAP and all the staffing. I think from a fire side, our up staffing, PD's doing an all hands on deck. Nobody gets the choice this year. So there will be adequate staffing, but July 4th planning is underway. And then I just wanted to talk briefly. We had we participated in a countywide tsunami exercise a few weeks ago. So we activated our EOC, and what we did, just for everybody's awareness, is we looked specifically at the planning section within the EOC and our ability to basically maintain situational awareness during a real-time emerging incident, while also simultaneously planning for the tsunami that's coming in 6 hours. And the section, that planning section in the EOC, that's its job to maintain, to know what's going on, but be planning for the next step. And that's one of the most complicated. So we had an earthquake scenario. So there was a moderate sized earthquake. And so the planning section was managing all the information coming in on the earthquake damage. And then we got alert of the Aleutian Islands earthquake with the incoming tsunami and their ability to maintain and manage both of those incidents. One of the really fun things, I think, at least from my side, and I think the firefighters enjoyed it too, was we did a real-time full-scale exercise on the fire department side and deployed all of our apparatus out to do the windshield surveys. So
Out of the crushed stations.
all the stations were fine in this scenario. And so all of our engines were able to go and do the windshield surveys, and we partnered with our CERT volunteers.
And they went and looked at the rubble that used to be City Hall.
Just turned around, damage assessment right behind us. So we partnered with the CERT volunteers and put CERT volunteers out in the neighborhoods, and the engine crews during their windshield surveys had to find the CERT volunteer in the area, who then relayed verbally to the captain the damage that they found in their neighborhood. And then the engine captains reported that information in real time in on their mobile devices that we can see in the EOC. So we see that real-time damage assessment coming in. They're doing the priorities and the follow-up needed, whether it's utility companies or whether it's city agencies, so that the EOC then can help support and make sure that those are being prioritized. It was great. It was really great to see that real-time information coming in. It was a great use of our CERT volunteers, because that's one of the things that they're trained to do. Is the earthquake happens, they're going to start walking around their neighborhood and getting a sense of that damage and what can they do. So I don't know, Cap, if you were working that day. No. So I think the engine captains enjoyed it. Just find the volunteer. They're going to be out in a green vest. Drive these blocks until you find the guy in the green vest, and then they'll tell you what you got. So it was a lot of fun, both on the EOC side, but then in the field side.
Well, I never heard about that as a CERT volunteer. I'd have signed up for it in a heartbeat.
So because it was very much a last minute, a lot of the pieces came in at the last minute. The EOC exercise was what we had been planning for, with the county, participating with the county with this earthquake and tsunami. And then Chief Lether had the idea a week beforehand. Chief Hill and I had talked about, we'll do the windshield survey and we'll just send them out and they'll practice their routes like it's in that SOP. They'll just drive their routes. And I think a week beforehand, Chief Lether threw a wrench in it and he said, how about we do CERT volunteers too? And I was like, oh, I'm like, final exercise plan ready to go. And Chief Lether said, how about we use CERT volunteers? And so he threw a wrench in it at the last minute. So Sonny called around and got
half a dozen people,
six other volunteers.
Great, good for him.
Just because it was we had a week to get it done. So
Shelley, were you one of the CERT volunteers, or okay? You didn't get the word either.
No, didn't know about it, but that's okay.
Yeah. So it was because we needed to be strategic about where so we had volunteers spread out across as many areas as we could. Otherwise they might have been clustered a little bit too much. And so it was a last minute thing that we threw together. Sonny was great, helping coordinate that at the last minute, and adding that piece to it, which I think was a lot of fun.
That's great. And it's realistic, because that's what
it's absolutely realistic. Yeah.
No, that's great. So, it sounds like a very good exercise. Any questions or any thoughts for Brendan on this? From anyone? All right, seeing none, is that it? Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you. That's a great report. All right, CERT report. I think everybody can read it. I said I'd take care of that for Sunny. The big thing in the ERS report that Sunny usually, well, he should, I'm sorry, I'm skipping the subcommittee reports, but I will skip ahead to CERT. Do take a look at the link. Read this thing. It's the link to the April 23 Hazards 6 report from FEMA. Hey, take care, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Good.
Thank you. Guys.
Thank you. From FEMA, USGS, and the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program. And Sunny asked that it be added to the May 1 agenda. It got omitted in an accident. This document basically identified LA, Long Beach, Anaheim Metro, of which Laguna Beach is a part, as the national epicenter for expected economic losses from future earthquake activity. I mean, we are the earthquake capital of the United States of America right here in Southern California. So that's something to keep in mind when you're talking about prioritization of things like a seismically competent place to put the EOC. And obviously, as we get that tier 3 completed, kind of underscores the importance of making sure that we in fact actually do something about the results of that study to improve the seismic competence and seismic resilience of our critical infrastructure. And that's just the document's not in there because it's almost 100 pages long. We decided to save a tree.
Good call.
Of course, any tree we were able to utilize to increase the depth of our the depth and weight of our monthly agendas is probably one that won't burn. In any case, do take a look at that. That's a very interesting report. Subcommittees, Shelley, Climate Action and Adaptation Working Group.
Yep. So they're just working right now. PlaceWorks is working on their intakes from all the departments. Matt and I participated last month in some of those meetings, the initial meetings, and they're putting together some reporting and things that the actual committee, the ad hoc committee, which Matt is on and I'm on, we will review some of their initial intake and inputs, and then we'll continue on to the next phase. So again, this is an 18-month total process. Right now we're in, about 14 months now left. And we'll continue to work with them. And if there's any low-hanging fruit that can be done now, Matt has mentioned in the meetings, and so have I, we'll go ahead and pull the trigger on those if it's an adaptation phase for this particular EDPC, or if it's a climate one for the ESC. So that's all for now. Thanks, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Any questions for Shelley? Any? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Communications, Tim Templeton, obviously not here, nor is Sunny, so we'll skip that. Critical facilities, nothing there. Emergency circulation, Edward? All right, nothing there. Emergency medical?
Yeah, one question to Brandon. I understand with the Laguna Beach government texts that go out to determine, about traffic and such, would it be possible in the low adverse effect or low risk of a major incident that Laguna Beach government puts out a text alerting the EMU to deploy? Is there any way to do that?
Not through Nixle.
We could just, I think we're talking, what, about 8 people or something?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, not through Nixle, but what we could look at is, and Sunny and I can have the conversation. We might be able to build a group into the Better Impact, which is what we use to notify CERT volunteers. So we might be able to build a group in because we pay for that anyways. Nixle just would, the communications team manages the Nixle stuff.
Okay.
I can control Better Impact. So we might have more ability to manage it if we put your volunteers into our Better Impact system. And sort of 8 additional people wouldn't be a lot to absorb that cost into the CERT budget. And so we could build in those profiles. We can talk to Sunny about that. We might be able to build that in.
Sure. And
Yeah.
who makes up the communications team offhand?
So the communication, that's Cassie Walder is our PIO,
Okay.
and she manages the communications program.
Wouldn't it be easy? I mean, does Better Impact provide for outgoing texts, or is that just something you see in the website or emails, or how
No.
does that?
Better Impact has the ability, it's basically a volunteer management
Okay,
platform. And so we use it. We have the volunteers profiles in it. Their certifications are in it, so that when any of us need to mobilize CERT, we can sort by specific qualifications
got it.
and just send out email, text notifications to that group. So if I'm looking for shelter volunteers, I'll filter by anybody that's been through the shelter training. And then it'll just notify the CERT volunteers that are shelter trained. So we could consider something where we're building a unique profile for the
EMU.
yeah,
Yeah.
and utilize that system.
Okay. So they would, in other words, they wouldn't be getting text.
They wouldn't be
every-
getting all the CERT
Right,
stuff.
okay.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So is that email and text or you, because
So we currently mostly we just use it for email. The
Right,
thing about the
because I'm-
text is because we didn't do it up front when everybody signed up,
right?
everybody would have to go in and manually update their own profiles to add text. And out of the 280 volunteers that we have in the system, I hear from like 25 of you. So we just haven't really rolled out the text on the CERT side of it, just because it's on each volunteer to then go in and do it. And I'm not going to start utilizing it if we're not doing it for sort of for everybody. But if we're creating a new group, creating new profiles for a smaller group,
Then you
then
can-
That makes
that's
sense, yeah.
building into that profile and clicking that box and adding cell phones.
right, because I
yeah.
think that gets to people much, quicker than checking one more email, or especially if you have to go in and
I agree, and I wish there was a better way for us to do it with the whole CERT, with all the CERT volunteers, to be able to say, if you're interested in getting text, here's an easy way to do it, but it's a manual. Each volunteer would have to go in and add that piece into their profile, and it's
maybe as the new volunteers are coming, you should slowly change the database. So at some point, at least you'll have some guidance as to where it's going.
we
rather
could, yeah.
than,
I just haven't, because we're not using it
Right.
until we do it sort of for everybody. Just hadn't added that piece. We've played around with it on the board. It works well. It's the email to text, every cell phone number has an email attached to it at verizon.mobile.net or whatever. So you actually add in your cell phone number, email address, and that's how it works. So, but yeah, we can, Dr. Dodge, we can certainly talk about that. Yeah.
Great.
I think that would be give us more control over it. I think you as the group leader and I would give us more ability to manage it, I think, than trying to go through Nixle.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I just happen to be talking to my physician about it in Laguna Beach, and he's a Laguna Beach resident and he wants to join. So I have his business card and he said, have Dr. Dodge contact me. So
I'll add them on.
You've just increased you've just increased the number of participants by a factor of a full 8. Thank you. Let's see, fire risk mitigation. Oh, the only thing I'm going to point out is that we are seeing major P&C insurance carriers dropping California like a bad habit. In the last 10 days, we've heard that, and again, this is based on news reports, State Farm has made a decision not to sell new policies, homeowners policies here in California, which is absolutely stunning. I mean, I know these companies. The other one is Allstate. Both State Farm and Allstate were major clients of mine and investment finance clients back when I ran the Midwest desk for NatWest back in the 90s. The DNA of these companies does not change or evolve very rapidly. They're very growth oriented. And for them, in the case of State Farm, their total revenue nationally is about $70 billion a year. 10% of that comes from California. So for them to say that we're just not going to grow 10% of our revenue base and refuse to commit to even keeping that 10% intact is really a stunning announcement. And a lot of that has to do with a form of regulation from CDI that we cannot do anything about. But it's just going to make it even more challenging for our residents to keep getting their insurance, their fire insurance from private sources. And farmers has kind of done a quiet quitting on us. They're basically saying they have not really owned up to it, but they've kind of basically under inquiry from I think ABC News admitted that they're really not signing up new customers here in California. AIG and Chubb pretty much left the state period last year. So if we want to continue having private insurers, our access to private insurers for our residents here in Laguna Beach, we are just going to have to up our game in terms of fire prevention and suppression capability. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a big problem. And I will predict to you that the next shoe to drop will be mortgage availability.
Exactly.
Because remember how mortgages work now. I mean, it's not like the friendly old Joe, the SNL VP down at the local SNL holding these things for 30 years. Everything is, they're originators now, not lenders. And so everything is sliced and diced into various tranches and sold to investors who buy what's called mortgage-backed securities, which happens to be a market my wife helped pioneer on Wall Street at Drexel Burnham just about almost 40 years ago. And I'll tell you, the investors in MBS, ironically, many of them insurance companies, are starting to take a very hard look at looking at what's in their portfolio from the standpoint of California cities that are at large areas of high and very high fire hazard severity zone. So it's not inconceivable in the next year or 2 years, you're going to start to see a lot of stories about cities that are basically being redlined by mortgage lenders. And that could be have very serious implications for our property values and hence for the general fund, which tends to be replenished or enhanced every year by increased property values here in Laguna Beach. So we could be, as a city and as a community, in a world of hurt if we have a major fire incident here of any kind, even if it only affects a couple of dozen homes. It could wind up impacting everybody who lives here. So that's something to keep very much in mind and something to keep both council and staff leadership's attention focused on. That's all I've got. Policy and Ordinance Working Group. Brendan, let us know when you need us for the local hazard mitigation plan update. I know that's got to be coming up sometime in the not too distant future. Any other questions? Anything else for Brendan on the committee reports or any questions about anything?
Well, it just
Seeing none,
seems
we'll
like
move on.
this- Just seems like this insurance industry is kind of a little bit political move on some of those companies trying to force the state into changing their structure of rate increase hikes. Because as far as I think State Farm is concerned, I think they're even thinking down the line to keep dropping the existing policies a year down the line if they don't get what they want. So this might just be the beginning of not getting
Oh, absolutely. I
policies.
mean, the insurance industry is absolutely furious about the kind of regulation and the level of regulation and the type of regulation they have to deal with from CDI. My own carrier decided to drop private earthquake coverage and basically go to CTA, which is, I think, is very questionable in terms of CEA, not CTA, which I think is extremely questionable in terms of an insurance policy. If you read it, I don't use it. And the reason for that, and I talked to the head of sales here in California, was simply said, look, we don't think we could get the level of rate increases through CDI that we would need to stay active in this marketplace and make it economically viable. So as the risk and threat level increases and as the regulatory environment in Sacramento continues to become more and more burdensome, you're going to see a lot of insurance carriers being, shall we say, very selective in what they're going to underwrite here in California.
Yep.
And that could really impact a community like ours in a very severe way. We're the perfect storm of high value properties and high risk. So it's something to be very, very much aware of. Anything else on anything? Moving, if not, we'll move on. Shelley, Greater Laguna Coast Fire Safe Council. You're David. Well, he's in Europe.
Yeah, happy to chime in here. So we pull black sage, buckwheat, California sage, lemonade berry, and sumac. When we put everything in the monitor, in the moisture meter, which we call Ben, we put lemonade berry and sumac together with a very hardy, but just so you guys are aware, we do that for this Santa Ana Wind Threat Index, these readings. So overall, year over year, it's incredible how much moisture these particular 5 species are holding. They're nearly 90%, year over year, but month over month they're going down slightly. And when you look at the report, so month over month, from April to May, they're coming down a bit, and we haven't done, obviously, any June readings just yet. But I'll go out there and grab some, and we'll see what we can much So overall, again, 22 was a much drier year during this phase of spring, late spring, than it was here in 2023. So that's pretty much the report, and let's hope they retain their moisture for our fire, upcoming summer. I shouldn't say fire season, right? Since fire season's always on
12 months a year.
So that's all I got. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you for doing this. Shelley is one of our trained volunteers for not only for CERT, but also for the Fire Safe Council, and actually works with David collecting a lot of this data, which is extremely important. So thank you for that. The basic story, I take it, is year over year increases, but continued sequential decline as we go into the drier part of the year. So that's surprising, but hopefully that'll hold a bit. All right, comments from anyone on anything? Seeing none, we'll move on. 5.1 we've covered. Readout from the May 16th Council Budget Workshop. Well, despite the fact I think we had 7 or 8 of us there, including a few CERT volunteers, the council was not particularly responsive in terms of EOC funding, so it's a bit unclear at this point when we're going to have a proper EOC. Keeping in mind that we are the disaster capital of Orange County, there is no other of the 30. I don't think any of the other 33 cities that make up the county has a rather impressive record of fires and floods and landslides. And obviously, we all share an earthquake risk, but it's unclear at this point what the timing is going to be of moving the EOC to the only seismically competent facility that the city owns. Coming attractions at council, June 13th, we have Shelley, David Horn, who will be back from Europe, Edward, Sonny, who will also be back from Europe, and Bill, who were up for council reappointment. Surprisingly, we did not get anyone else who applied. So we're going to continue to be one down for the time being, but the committee was set up as 7 originally. It's been a lot more than that of late, but we'll obviously be down to 8 full members plus Shelley, and since we have that extra member slot, then Shelley will be able to continue to vote as a member, but that's kind of a distinction as far as I can tell without a difference. I can't remember the last time we had a vote that wasn't unanimous, and I'm glad we're able to have a cohesive and fact-based culture here. So we tend to agree on things, and that's good. And we listen to each other and respect each other, which is also good. Also, one item that'll come up then will be an authorization for advisory committees to appoint non-voting student liaison. We'll have to see how that shakes out, and we'll decide what to do with that accordingly. I know that's an area that Shelley has been interested in for some time, and maybe it's time to revisit that. I think we have 19 high school students who went through the CERT training. So we have actually 19 people who are qualified CERT volunteers at this point who are part of the high school group. July 11th coming up. There'll be the first council meeting in July. Item number 8, which is award for the contract of design of a city facility seismic upgrades. And that is really the tier 3 evaluation I'm told by Public Works that in fact will be the award of the contract. They are still in the process of finalizing the winner of the RFP. And that process will probably take about a year because this is going to be some destructive testing. It's going to be some fairly invasive activities at the City Hall and the stations 1, 2, and 3. I don't believe, Brendan, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be anything done with respect to Station 4, since we kind of know already that it's just not worth putting a new nail into. Let's just replace it and get that bad boy repurposed for something else. And if it's a parking lot, I'm fine with it. Moving on, community risk assessment standards of cover had been set for the end of July. So we were going to see the draft in July on the 10th. Unfortunately, that also has been pushed out a bit. Apparently that document is just not progressing quite as quickly as we had hoped. And it's very important that it be done right. And I'm 100% supportive. I think we all are taking the time to do it right. It's the first time we've ever done that in the city's nearly 100-year history. Probably not something we're going to do once a month thereafter. So let's do it and do it right. And now it's supposed to come back, I think, to council in October. So maybe if it comes to us in September or perhaps October, that would be great. EDPC work plan review, that's set for August 8th. I'd like everybody who possibly can to be at the meeting. I think next time we'll have a discussion in terms of what that should look like. Maybe we can scare up a little extra time because we haven't been there since June of 2019. If we could get an extra few minutes, at least give everybody a chance to introduce themselves so the council members, some of whom are new to the council, can have an opportunity to understand who we are and get a better sense of what we do. I'm also working with Gavin. The big item that we're going to have, and we'll talk about that as our last item, but the big item that we're going to have at our next meeting is really going to be the review, getting the input from staff on what they've been able to accomplish vis-a-vis the action items, if you will, in section 4 of the safety element. It's a little delayed, but clearly they've been pretty busy with a bunch of things, particularly Gavin, who is new to the job of ACM, is breaking in a new director of finance and had tremendous amount of work to do in doing his last budget. Well, kind of shifting gears in terms of the management of that function. And at the same time, they're bringing in an entirely new accounting system, which, as Julian and I know, is way overdue. We're finally implementing the new ERP system, as opposed to the current accounting system, which I wouldn't use to operate a lemonade stand, but that's just me. So Gavin is working hard on that. And what I'm trying to discuss, what I've had some discussions with him about, probably will have further discussions about, is to kind of give the policy and ordinance working group a chance to work with him so we can come to the EDPC at the next meeting with a recommendation and with a kind of a pre-digested version of that, and then do the presentation, hopefully to council, as kind of a joint effort, which I think would be a productive way to approach it. But that's going to, the staff's call, not ours on that. So that's it. Any questions or comments or feedback or anything on any of those points? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to 5.3, proposed agenda items. Well, the biggie is going to be the basically the ACM presentation to us on the city progress regarding the general plan safety element. The other item, of course, that we had tentatively scheduled was the review of the community risk assessment standards of cover. That's been pushed back about another 60 to 90 days. So we'll have to see when that gets scheduled. City grant writing consultants. This was something that Council Member Ranagi had suggested back at the January 10th council meeting. City manager said it would happen. Brendan, I don't know if you've reached out to see if they're interested in doing anything with us, or if we can get any money out of them. We ain't bashful here about asking people for money. So
We'll ask again. I think it's totally appropriate, because
Yeah. I don't
it's not
think-
that they have the money, but they to get them to get the grant writing group to make sure that they're prioritizing their time, focusing on some of those hazard mitigation grants that
Right.
are out there. And
I mean,
one of my pushes on it is
David Horn has been able to square some of that away, and I can't see why our paid grant writers can't help us out on that.
so I think that's what I'd like to see as part of the conversation, is to maybe better understand from the grant writers what's their sort of threshold that they're
Right.
looking at. Are they only looking at these multi-million-dollar grants? Are they also looking towards grants, the 50, 75,000, the $100,000 that we could use to help equip an EOC, or to do some of our smaller projects with
mean,
some of those other things?
Our plethora of unmet public safety needs.
Right. Or are they really just, as the consultants for the city, are they mandated to really just direct their focus on those brick grants, those multi-million-dollar, the undergrounding, just so we can make sure we understand
Exactly.
and are advocating that there's a lot of money out there. And we, to be totally honest, I don't have the bandwidth to just be looking at grants and applying for grants all the time, but there is a lot of money out there that we could use, that we qualify for, even as a,
Just lying on the table and we're missing it.
yeah. So, I'll put that in. Would you like that? Are you thinking at the July meeting over at Suzy Q for that, or
Well, I would
just a
be-
future meeting?
July would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, sooner the better. Sooner we get them in, the sooner we can ask them for, help raising money.
Okay.
Shelley's
got her hand up.
I'm sorry, shall we
No,
go
that's
ahead?
Yeah, so Fauna and I have been talking about the grants because she actually got that whole kind of department in my knowledge from Sheree. So I think Fauna is in charge of kind of that relationship with the grant writers, and she's been working on a lot of them. So Matt, that's a good thing for us. So if we have some ideas for her, anything that we can funnel to her, even if it's through Brendan, I think that might be an option. I know this just to be true because last week I was on the phone with her and she's talking about writing some of the grants and reviewing some of them. So that's a good thing to have in our back pocket.
Well, Fauna is terrific. I really think a great add to the city staff and is doing a great job. And Brendan, if you want to work, Fauna, so just reach out and
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out to her.
see what we
Thanks,
can do
Shelley.
to make something happen there. And, it's a matter of understanding what they think is out there and what we might need. And anything we can do to help bring some money in the door for public safety, we're happy to. Moving along here, I just want to give everybody a heads up. When it comes to asking for money, we do have some interesting programming coming to us in the next few months. We pretty much got our tent poles, hopefully through most of the rest of the year. We talked about the July 10th program. The August 7th program, I think, is going to be terrific. We've got Supervisor Katrina Foley locked in. That's a done deal. Thank you, Alex Renagi, former Foley staffer. Unfortunately, Bob will be on vacation, but Alex will be here to introduce her, and that'll be great. And we've already got a whole list of topics that I've worked out with Bob Whalen to discuss. I mean, if the politicians can come to Laguna Beach, like the fundraiser that is being hosted tonight for David Min, who's running for this local congressional seat, if they can come and rattle the tin cups in our direction, no reason we can't turn that around and rattle the tin cups in their direction. So we'll be seeing Supervisor Foley on the 7th. We're having some we've pretty much locked in the meeting for October 2nd with State Senator Janice Nguyen. So hopefully we'll be able to have a good conversation there. And as I mentioned, State Senator Dave Min is going to be, as we speak, doing a fundraiser and kind of a meet and greet here in Laguna Beach tonight. And I'm told that some of our council members may be present, and hopefully we'll be able to get him here for November 4th or possibly November 6th or possibly December 4th. And again, we're going to reach out as well to Assemblywoman Diane Dixon. We're completely nonpartisan or bipartisan when it comes to asking people for money. We don't care if they're red or blue. All they need to do is deliver the green. And green is my favorite color. Any questions or comments or feedback from anybody on anything? Okay. Seeing none, we get to our last and favorite part of the evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Now, wait a minute, I'm not sure we can do this legally until Julian gets back and we have our quorum here. Brendan, I'll let you be the parliamentarian on that. You think we can pull the plug?
Yes. So